5,000 years of the finest minds in this galaxy have failed here. Do not embarrass yourself, human.
On the outer rim of the Cassarian Nebula, aboard the research station known as the Continuum Spire, humanity's first exchange scholar arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a battered notebook. His name was Milo Ashgrove, 17 years old, from a small town that had never once thought to imagine what a spire like this could be. He had been chosen not because he was the smartest human alive, but because he had a way of looking at problems sideways. Milo had been chosen through a lottery even he considered a fluke, a joint outreach program between Earth's fledgling Interstellar Academy and the Threnai Compact, meant more as a gesture of goodwill than a genuine exchange of expertise. Nobody on the selection committee expected the chosen human to matter. Milo hadn't expected it either, right up until the moment the spire's gravity well caught his shuttle and pulled him into a world built entirely from centuries of unanswered questions. The spire's chief scientist, Illyra Vantas, met him at the docking bay. She was pale-skinned in the way of her people, the Threnai, with hair like spun frost and eyes the color of a winter sea. She did not smile. The Threnai rarely did, not because they lacked warmth, but because 5,000 years of failure had worn the expression out of them. "You are the human," she said, not a question. "Milo," he said, extending a hand she did not take. "You will observe. You will not touch anything." Her voice held the flatness of someone who had said the same sentence to 100 visitors before him and watched every one of them fail to understand what they were looking at. She led him through corridors lit blue with old technology, past archives stacked with failed proofs, to the heart of the spire, a chamber where a great circular hologram turned slowly in the dark, etched with symbols that shifted and rearranged every few seconds, never settling. This was the Kale Ward, an equation left behind by a civilization so old that even the Threnai's ancestors had found only ruins. Solving it, legend said, would unlock the ward's core, a vault of knowledge that could rewrite everything the galaxy understood about energy, matter, and time. For 5,000 years, every great mind among the Threnai and a dozen allied species had thrown themselves against the Kale Ward. Doran Kest, the spire's eldest scholar, had spent 300 years alone on the outer symbols and still could not make them hold still long enough to read. "It resists sequence," he told Milo on his first night, not unkindly, just tired. "The moment you believe you understand its order, it changes the order to prove you wrong." Milo nodded and said nothing, but that night he did not sleep. He sat at the edge of the observation deck with his notebook, sketching the symbols from memory, not as a sequence, but as a shape. He had noticed something nobody else had bothered to notice. Because nobody else had ever been trained to notice it, the symbols did not resist pattern. They resisted linear pattern. The Threnai, brilliant as they were, had spent 5 millennia trying to read the ward the way you read a sentence, left to right, cause to effect. But Milo had grown up solving puzzles that weren't meant to be read in order at all. The wordless, image-based logic games his grandmother had taught him, puzzles built from symmetry instead of sequence. By morning, he asked Illyra for permission to stand before the ward. She refused. He asked again. She refused again, more sharply, reminding him that greater minds than his had spent lifetimes failing where he now proposed to succeed in an afternoon. But Doran, watching quietly from the doorway, said only, "Let the boy look. Looking has never broken anything." Illyra allowed it, arms crossed, expecting nothing. Milo stepped up to the projection and did not try to read it. Instead, he closed one eye and tilted his head, the way he used to when solving those old symmetry puzzles, letting the shifting symbols blur into shapes instead of letters. And there it was, a mirror. The ward was not an equation to be solved forward. It was a reflection folded in on itself, a rune that only made sense when read simultaneously from both ends toward the center, like a message written to meet itself halfway. He didn't touch the hologram. He simply spoke the reading aloud, tracing the outer ring with one finger in the air, then the inner ring, describing how the two halves mirrored and completed one another. Symbol by symbol, he called out the true order, not the order it displayed, but the order it had always meant, hidden in plain sight from an audience that had trained itself, for 5,000 years, to look the wrong way. The chamber went silent. Then the ward stopped shifting. For the first time in 5 millennia, the hologram held still. Illyra's breath caught. Doran stepped forward, ancient eyes wide, murmuring the reading back to himself as though checking Milo's work against every failed proof he had ever memorized and finding, to his astonishment, that it matched none of them, and yet answered all of them at once. The ward's outer shell dissolved into light, and the vault at its center opened for the first time since its makers had sealed it away. Inside was not a weapon, not a doomsday device, but a single archive, the full accumulated knowledge of the vanished civilization that had built the spire's foundations, offered freely to whoever proved patient enough, or strange enough, to read it correctly. Illyra turned to Milo, and for the first time since his arrival, something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but close enough to one. 5,000 years, she said quietly. We had the sharpest minds this galaxy has produced, and not one of them thought to stop reading forward. You weren't wrong, Milo said. You just needed someone who never learned the rules you were following. Doran laughed, a rare, rusty sound, and clasped Milo's shoulder with something like reverence. Then perhaps, he said, the spire has needed a stranger all along. In the weeks that followed, Illyra asked Milo to remain on the spire, not as a guest this time, but as a research partner, an offer the Threnai had extended to no outsider in living memory. Word of the ward's opening spread across a dozen systems within days, and scholars who had once dismissed Earth as a backwater world began sending inquiries about the boy who had solved what 5,000 years of brilliance could not. That night, the station's ancient lights burned brighter than they had in living memory, and for the first time in 5,000 years,